Okay, we'll move on with our class, and we're going to talk about the 3 keys to happiness. We're going to take several lessons to go over these and cover them fairly thoroughly. The 3 basic keys to happiness in any relationship are: number 1, communication; number 2, giving and receiving; and 3 is trust. Now, it's important to contemplate the root source of happiness. It can be summed up in one sentence: interaction with others that leads to unity. And when you think about it, when you have a relationship with anyone, whether it be a friend or a romantic or even business or anything, the real goal of everything that you're doing is try to reach oneness with that person. If you're a friend, it's really great to be able to share with a friend a common interest. That common interest will bring you two together and make you feel have a very worthwhile relationship. And so this gravitation toward oneness, this desire we have within us to achieve oneness with other people, is very strong. Now, as a group here, we do what we can to achieve oneness with each other. And I think everybody in the group likes everybody else pretty much. And so that is good. We have certain things that we all have in common, and this brings us together and makes us overlook differences. We all have differences in personality, which is fine. And sometimes differences in personality actually attracts. We may be attracted to somebody with a talent that we do not have. But on the other hand, this type of attraction also leads to unity, because if you team up with somebody else that has a talent that you don't have that is useful for what you're doing, it makes you feel like there's a wholeness aspect about the combination of the two, even though you are different. It's like 2 pieces of a puzzle coming together. And so in any relationship, there are similarities that will attract, and there will be things that are maybe different yet needed to accomplish certain things that give needed pieces to the puzzle, so to speak. What is the most important union that we need to seek, though? We want union with other people, but before we can really achieve that to a high degree, we have to have union with what?
Our soul,
Right, your soul and your higher self. You could
your
say
monad,
sensitive to this, the Holy Spirit would be one way to word it. Sensitive to your higher self, sensitive to the soul energies. And if you're sensitive to your soul and come across somebody else that's sensitive to their souls, then union is a much easier with that person. Now, if one person is sensitive to soul energy and another person isn't, that person who is sensitive to his soul will have an advantage in bringing union, because he'll have a sense as to what he can do to stimulate union with that other person. If 2 people have very little connection with their soul, then it's kind of hit and miss. Sometimes they'll feel like they're connected, and then other times they'll feel totally disconnected. This is why so many marriages end in divorce, is that they get together and they kind of hit a spark together, but because of lack of soul contact with one or both of them, then pretty soon they're looking on aspects of the personality that are totally different, and they feel that pull toward union turn to disgust and revulsion almost. So it's amazing how many people, when they get divorced, just completely loathe each each other. It's also interesting how many times that when people get divorced, how they go out to try to, instead of just sitting down and saying, okay, we're just going to divide up everything 50-50. Well, they both want to get everything they can, quite often, instead of being fair about dividing things up. They just want to really hurt the other person. If they could, they would take everything that the other party has away from them, so they would be homeless pretty much, and that would probably make them real happy. That's the way a lot of people feel as they're getting divorced, and these are people that need additional soul contact. So soul contact will bring a sense of fairness as they work toward unity. Now, communion is the most important of all the keys to happiness, for it's a foundation upon which the other two are built. Now, contemplate this sentence for a moment. If any two people truly communicate, they will be one. For most disagreements are caused by a failure to communicate. Kind of remind you of the words of Cool Hand Luke in the movie. He says, what we have here is a failure to communicate. And so it's interesting how many problems happen just because of a failure to communicate. And a lack of union is often by a failure to communicate. The only exception to this is when you're dealing with a person that's extremely selfish versus an unselfish person. If a person is extremely selfish, then communicating will not necessarily bring oneness because he wants what he wants and is unwilling to share, and he just out for self. So this type of person, he may understand you, but he's just not going to cooperate. But most people do want to have a union with loved ones, friends, associates. They would rather have union than disunion. But there's a handful of people that are just completely on the selfish path that really don't care about that. They just care about themselves. But most people are looking to share. And so there are problems of lack of union can often be solved by just mere communication. So in most cases, in a relationship, unhappiness is caused by a lack of communication. Now, a divorce is in that last analysis, a statement that one or both parties says, if you had communicated with me before I married you, what is communicated to me now, I would have seen that our relationship would not work. Now, some people here have gone through divorces before, and it's interesting that as people get to know each other in a relationship, they find that it's just not working. And if they will think, well, gosh, if I'd have known this about the guy before I married him, I wouldn't have married him if I'd have had that communication. But people filter communication when they're first meet. They put forth their best side. And then there are more negative aspects come out later, because when we first meet somebody, whether it be a romantic relationship, a friendship, a business relationship, applying for a job or whatever, we always tend to put our best side forward. On your first date, you may shower the person with flowers and bottle of wine and just be charming as the Dickens. And then after you get to know the person a while, you want to sit on the couch and drink beer and watch a football game and ignore the person. So, and so things change a lot. And so people think, boy, if I'd have just known, if I'd had this communicated with me earlier, it could have saved me 10 years of a bad marriage or whatever. But on the other hand, we learn a lot from a marriage. And every close relationship, we learn a lot about ourselves, about sharpening, smoothing off the rough edges of ourselves, so we become better people. So you have maybe two people get together, they have a rough relationship, and then they get a divorce. And both of them, maybe in their next relationship, learn something from the failure, and maybe both of them are better people, more likely to succeed because of what they learned in their failures. We learn a lot from failures. Now, people can communicate with each other only to the degree they have learned to communicate with their souls. And so if a person, everybody gets some impulses from their souls, but full soul contact is a step-by-step process. But there's always some type of communication we get from our souls. Even sometimes in our dreams, our soul may send us some type of message. So the more soul contact we have, the better we are able to communicate with other people. Now, words themselves veil true meanings. And to have true communication, you have to like read between the lines. You ever known people that just, you try to give them a hint, but maybe don't come outwardly and say something, but you feel like you just need to give them a hint and they just can't get the hint? And some people can read between the lines and some people can't. And so reading between the lines is important for a relationship, because oftentimes your partner will have a grievance against you or a problem that needs to be solved and not communicate fully with you. And so if you can just pick up these little hints, it will help the relationship tremendously. Say, for instance, a Catholic and Protestant have a child who has become old enough to go to church. The two get in a heated argument about which religion he's going to be raised in. This disagreement shows a lack of communication in three areas. Number one, the premarital, they should have discussed this before they even got married. And second, current feelings. And three, communication with their souls. So here's an example of a basic problem that gives an example of what we have to deal with. I'll just read this to you. Joe likes to play cards with the boys every Wednesday night, and Mary does not like this, where she says she wants him to spend more time alone with her. Joe becomes upset because he feels restricted and nagged, and Mary is upset because she feels lonely and rejected. Again, Joe's need to spend time with his friends, as well as Mary's need for companionship, should have been communicated before they were married. If they have made it may have made a difference in their decision to marry. On the other hand, it's possible that a little communication in the present will solve the problem. Does Mary really need Joe home every night, or does she just want more attention and security in their relationship? Is it possible that when she says, "I want you home tonight," is a deceptive communication? Is she really avoiding saying what she means because of fear of rejection and hurt? Is she really saying, "I want to be more of a part of your life. I want you to think I am important. And if you made me feel that way, I wouldn't feel so insecure if you left and play cards. Perhaps Joe thinks Mary is very important, but has not communicated this to her. Perhaps it has been years since he brought her flowers, or wrote her a sweet note, or told her how much he cared for her. Communication leads the way to the fulfillment of both of their needs. So that's a situation that if they would have honestly communicated, they might not, the, the problem of him playing cards once a week may not have even been a problem.
JJ,
Yeah,
I'm sorry. Could is it now? Let's see. Now, is it possible that Mary feels insecure in this situation where he has a boys' night out once a week, and she's left at home or what have you, so she's just feeling slighted or even betrayed in some sense one night a week.
yeah, there are certain individuals that don't want the other party out of their side even one night a week. So circumstances will vary, but oftentimes problems like this can be solved with a little communication. If Joe shows her that she is important, that may be all that's needed. But then there's other situations where maybe there's nothing that would satisfy the gal. So each situation's a little bit different. Now, one of the big problems in relationships and communications are arguments. Now, arguments are a main source of discord and have three basic causes. One interesting one that isn't often brought up is arguments are often caused by having different definitions of words. Examples are words like teach, or law, or truth, or death. As I told you before, in the Keys groups, we weren't too far along there, and somebody says, "Hey, we think we're ready for a molecule because we can be one." And I says, "Well, you guys don't realize how difficult it is to settle a disagreement." And they thought it would be easy, so I brought forth a political disagreement that people had in the group. And we started talking about this, and we got stuck on the word law, what a law meant. So some were seeing law as anything related like a traffic law or whatever, or rules associated, any rule with a law, and others saw law as some great law of nature. And so I said, we have to agree on how we're going to define law before we can move ahead with this discussion, because everybody has a different idea of what a law is. So I tried to get the group to settle on one definition of the word law, and they couldn't do that. I mean, everybody insisted we use what they think a law is. So we went on for about a month arguing about this, and we got stuck on the fact that we could not agree on what a law was. And I said, well, it's not so much that we find the ultimate definition of a law, it's that we just define it in a way that we can all agree to use, you know. The other thing is, like, teach is another one. When I talk about teaching, quite often people will say, well, we're all teachers and students. So I talk about teachers and students quite a bit, and people say, well, we're all teachers and we're all students, as if there's no such thing as a teacher, as a real teacher. Well, again, it gets down to how you define things again. In any situation, one person sends more and the other person receives more. And sometimes it can be reversed depending on what they're doing. And so that's another word that people have a problem with. Another word is truth. Truth, some people say that truth is relative, and other people say it's not. what is relative more than anything else is perception of truth, not truth itself. But people have a hard time using the word truth consistently. So often when people have an argument about truth, it's because one person has one idea what truth is and one another. So it reminds me when Jesus was before Pilate, Pilate asked him, what is truth? Because that's a question that a lot of people ask because people have not settled on a definition. Another word that people define differently is death. You start talking about death and some idealistic person will say, well, there's no death, there's no such thing. Well, depends on how you define death. If you define death as just being extinguished into oblivion, well, yeah, you're right, there's no such thing. But that's not the common definition of death. Common definition of death is just the body dying, the physical body dying, and then of course spirit lives on. So the separation of spirit and body is death. There's definitely such a thing as your physical body dying and decaying. So that definitely does exist. So but this different way of looking at the word death can cause two people to have a bunch of arguments when they're not really disagreeing. So sometimes if you can just get together and come to the same definition of the words that you're talking about, that will often solve the argument. So if you're arguing about whether or not death exists and you both come up with the same definition of death, that the body can actually die, the spirit may live on, then you can start with a point of agreement. If you start out having a different definitions of the words, you can be talking about the same thing and think you're disagreeing, but you don't really disagree after all. So having different definitions of words. What I do is when I teach, I say, I use my words are the ones that's most commonly found in the dictionary unless I say otherwise. So if I'm using a word that's not the common definition in the dictionary, then I will define it and say, this is the way I'm using this particular word. Like soul, for instance, I've given a lot of elaboration on what I mean when I talk about use the word soul. And so it's not exactly the dictionary definition. So because of that, I've defined it. And this helps us to communicate. So it's a very simple thing. But how many times have you had an argument with somebody and they say, well, let's bring out the dictionary, find out what this word really means? Anyone had that experience before?
Well, not exactly, but I have a sort of funny story about that in spiritual groups. But I don't want to derail the topic if it's.
Yeah, I found that when you're having an argument with somebody and they want to bring in the dictionary, usually the argument doesn't go anywhere because even when you read it from the dictionary may have like 4 different definitions of a word, and they'll pick the one that is closest to what they're thinking of, and it may be totally different than what you're thinking of. So even the dictionary doesn't help because the dictionary gives, especially a big dictionary, unabridged dictionary gives quite a number of shades of meaning. And so when I have had an argument with somebody, they come up with a dictionary definition, it often does not help. But, and if it winds up, I found even if we get the dictionary and it supports what I'm thinking and the way that I'm using the word, and I'll say, see, the dictionary supports me. The other guy will sometimes will say, just ignore it. He still wants to go by his definition, even though it's contrary to the dictionary definition. So once you start arguing over what words means, what that means is one or both of you are not reading between the lines or not trying to understand each other, but are just trying to be right in black and white terms. And
Sometimes we do it on purpose, what they call a double entendre.
yeah, yeah,
Well, if it's a matter, I'm sorry to interrupt. If it's a matter of using a word incorrectly, and you point out that word does not mean what you think it is, and take out the dictionary and see what this word actually means, I could see where that would be an end of it. I mean, if the other person was reasonable, but then, as you say, the debate could rage on.
right. Once you get down to having to define words, especially a common word like death, that's a real common word. Now, when you talk about death to a little kid, he understands that the body dies and maybe the guy goes to heaven. And so a little kid, a child, doesn't have any problem with a lot of the words that adults have problems with. But then when adults get to learn too much brain learning, you might say, they start to want to discriminate too much, and they go overboard and they think, well, there is no death. You're just completely wrong on death. Okay, well, that's not even an argument that people should have, but people create arguments like that all the time when they get thinking too much. So the mind begins to slay the real, and instead of trying to see what the other person is saying, they just want to be right. Okay, and that's a problem. Curtis and I used to have arguments with my brother-in-law, who's now passed. He was a nuclear physicist, very intelligent man, and yet his approach to religion, even though he was a scientist, his approach to religion was really black and white. He kind of saw a devil under every rock, and even though he was a scientist, but so he was about the only family member we had that would actually argue with me and Curtis. But boy, he was a terrible guy to argue with. We'd point out something to him and he'd say, well, where in the scriptures does it say that? So we would quote him a scripture, and he would say, I'll let Curtis tell what kind of response he would get. What kind of response would he give,
He'll
Curtis?
say, well, yeah, but you might be taking that out of context. We have to read like 10 verses before and 10 verses after, and we have to analyze word by word before we can come up with any solution to our argument.
Yeah, and where normally me and Curtis would just discuss a verse and it take 30 seconds. He would take that verse, read before and analyze every verse, the 10 verses before, the 10 verses after, and he would wear us down. He was the only guy that got the best of us because he would wear us down. So Curtis and I would throw up our hands and say, okay, we'll just call it
You've
quits
been
here.
through attrition. There's no arguing with that guy.
You have to do it definitions in the dictionary. You got to do it strategically. So I was talking to somebody. I was saying this spiritual organization was a cult, and she was saying no, it's a spiritual organization, and I was like, and she said, oh, and it's not a religion either. So I was like, okay, well, let's look at the definition of these three things: spiritual organization, cult, and religion. So I pulled out the dictionary and I read the definition of cult, and she's like, no, that's not right. And I was like, okay. And we read the definition of religion, and she's like, no, that's not it either. So then I went back and I read the definition of cult again, but I said, this is the definition of a spiritual organization. And she was like, yeah, that's it.
Really? That's funny. Yeah, people are funny. And well, and what's great is when you meet people that have a touch of soul contact, it's so much easier to talk to them. Like this group here, we don't have very few we don't have any really down and out arguments among us here in this group. It's really, we just have a feel of what the other guy is saying here. But with a lot of people that you meet, and you start talking politics or religion or spirituality or vaccinations or anything, you will, it will be like pulling teeth to make any progress when you reach a point of disagreement. So it's really nice to have other people that you're on the same wavelength with.
Joe,
Yeah.
I can't understand why they're not more appreciative when I've proven to them how wrong they've been.
Yeah, that's one thing that I like about Dale Carnegie's book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. I read that when I was 16 and trying to get girls interested in me because I had a hard time when I was in high school. So I read this book. I thought maybe this will help me with girls, but it did help me with my relationships overall. But yeah, he points out how people do not like to be proven wrong. He says there's really, in most cases, there's no such thing as winning an argument. Because if you think you won an argument, and if you think you've really proven the other guy wrong, what he feels is he feels humiliated, and he will loathe you quite often because
Well, like they say, the man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still.
yeah, people do not like being proven wrong. So he says a way to deal with people is, give them credit for what they think that is correct. So find things positive to say about the other guy as you're gently leading him toward a different opinion. And it takes a lot of skill to be able to change a person's mind without making him angry. And
Well, in your
My teacher said, don't get into an argument, get into a discussion.
yeah, yeah, it's
I
hard to,
remember when I was looking for greater light and truth, and you came along. You didn't just say, "Well, let me show you here," about reincarnation and explain the mysteries in a way you've never understood. That would have rattled my cage. You went line upon line, precept upon precept until you felt like I was ready to grasp the concept of reincarnation. And at that point I was. So it was like you proceeded with caution, very slowly, kind of testing the water.
yeah, as I was in the Mormon church at the time, and I think what was I, about 26 or so when you moved into town.
Mhm.
But anyway, what I did is I had all this knowledge that went beyond what was taught in Mormonism, and I had to be very careful about who I talked to. So when I met people, other Mormons, invited them over for dinner or whatever, I'd ask them key questions. And one of the questions, I stuck to Mormon doctrine, and one of the questions was, where are the lost 10 tribes? Now, Mormons are very curious. In Mormon church, the belief is there were originally 12 tribes of Israel, and about 1,000 years or so BC, the 10 tribes just mysteriously vanished, and nobody knows where they went. Some people think they're under the earth or on another planet or hidden somewhere. And so it's a big mystery. So that was the main test question I asked people. I said, you ever wonder where the lost 10 tribes are? And almost every time I would get the same answer. Can you guess what that answer was, Curtis?
No one knows where they are.
Yeah, and not only that, but they said, well, that's one of the mysteries, and we're not supposed to inquire.
You're not
about
supposed to
mysteries.
search the mysteries.
If the prophet wants us to know where they are, then he'll tell us. Otherwise, and that was pretty much the answer I got from almost everybody. And when they give that answer, I knew that I couldn't possibly tell them anything that Dwell Cole had to say. Or I knew that reincarnation was way out of the ballpark for them if they couldn't answer that simple question.
Did you ever ask them can you ask them if they knew that there were kingdoms above the celestial? That was another grabber.
Yeah, I'd have several questions. Another one, I read them a scripture in the book of Revelations where it talks about people under the earth. And I says, you ever wonder who these people under the earth are? And boy, you'd get a blank stare from them, and like, we're entering forbidden territory here, because if the prophet wants us to know, he'll tell us. And as soon as they brought in the prophet,
You've been on thin ice.
then yeah, I knew that I could go no farther with that guy. And I did this with quite a few different people and got the same answer from everybody. And then Curtis happened to move in the same town I was living in at the time. And I invited him over for dinner, and I asked him, well, Curtis, you ever wonder where those 10 tribes are? And he says, yeah, I've thought about it quite often. I'm really curious. You got any ideas? And I thought, wow, my little nephew, who I didn't give any credit for being that bright, responds correctly, the first one. So anyway, that's interesting. It was interesting to me how difficult it was to find people that are ensconced in a standard religion to think out of the box to any degree. And so anyway, seeing from a different angle of vision or consciousness, especially mind versus emotion, is another cause of argument. So we have one cause, people define words differently and define things differently. The other cause is just seen from a different angle of vision. And this is oftentimes left and right brain, or emotion versus mind, or emotion versus emotion. Once you get two people centered in the mind, they can talk with a lot more reason, but even they will have disagreements. But especially difficult is mind versus emotion, because emotion thinks a certain way. They go by what they feel is correct. So if they feel something is correct, it doesn't have to be logical. It just has to feel right. But for the person centered in the mind, he has to think it to be correct. He has to see it in a logical basis why a certain belief is correct. Let's take, for instance, helping the poor. Now, both sides of the political spectrum don't want to see anybody starve to death, even though people will be accused of wanting people to starve to death. Very few people are unwilling to help people that are down and out, and we don't want anybody to go hungry. So how do we solve that problem? The feeling person will think, well, let's just spend all the money we need to spend and just take care of it, just simple as that. That's all there is to it. But the mental person will think, well, let's see how much money we have to solve this problem, and then we'll spend a set amount of money and spend it as efficiently as possible. Now, the emotional person will not think that way at all. He'll just think money is unlimited, because he feels that the problem should just be taken care of. So when it comes to helping people, he just thinks there's unlimited money that just can be unleashed, whereas the mental person wants to make sure that we can afford what we're the amount of money that's being spent. So this creates a conflict. And so the emotional person feels the mental person does not care. It's like the kid in the family, the parent has a credit card, and he realizes the credit card even though it's got a maybe pretty high limit, that the payments increase as the credit card is used more. And maybe the kid will think, well, gosh, why can't we get a new car? I mean, just use that credit card, you know? And I remember one time I was in the store with my mom when I was a little kid, and asked my mom to buy something. She said, we don't have enough money. I said, well, just write a check. Because I thought you could just write a check for any amount and that was it. Because I did not understand how checks work when I was like 6 years old. I just, because I figured it was just unlimited. That's all I had
People
to
still
do was
believe
write that check. So anyway, so it's difficult to talk about different things. We see things in different angles. Race and equality, welfare, different political topics like this is very sensitive. And oftentimes the two people having the argument really don't disagree that much. They perhaps both of them feel that there should be equality with races and everybody from every race should be treated well, but they just see it through a different angle of vision. Even though they disagree, they think, even though they agree in substance, they may have a lot of arguments because of details they're seeing from a different angle of vision and the way they define words. Like right now, people are defining a racist as being all kinds of things that wasn't in any definition 20 years ago. And so, others are staying with the way race was defined 20 years ago. So, but as it turns out, maybe they don't really disagree that much. And so what we need is that more communication. Okay, any comments on that before we move on? Looks like we're about out of time.
Yeah. Well, I think that's where the principle of tithing comes in. And that's another topic of dispute and debate. People think, well, yeah, you have to give it to your church and then let them do with it what they will. But if each month you take 10% of what you make and you use it to do good or to contribute or to help people, I think that's the best use of tithing. And then when that's gone, it's gone. Then next month you have more.
Yeah.
So
yeah, we're always better at using our own money than giving it to somebody else to use.
yeah, there are a lot of people that need help that you can help. You know, here's $20, here's $50. I made $5,000. I got $500 in my tithing fund. You know, when that's gone, it's gone. But until it's gone, I've got plenty to share.
Okay, the third cause of arguments is illusion. And we'll just cover this briefly, but illusion is where a person, you may have two people centered in the mind. Maybe they've risen above the emotions and they think they're logical, but they have foundation beliefs that are different. And because of different foundation beliefs, they have difficulty reaching agreement. For instance, one person may have mentally concluded that there is no God, and another person has mentally concluded there is a God. One person thinks that Darwin was right, and another person thinks that, well, maybe he isn't 100% right. And so they will argue over this, and these arguments are very difficult to resolve because it goes back to the foundation beliefs, and people don't change their foundation beliefs very easily. We're lucky if a person does it once in his life. And if he does it, it's usually because of a tremendous shakeup. For instance, reincarnation, to entering into the belief system of a religious person can really shatter the person's foundation belief and has to make him rethink everything all over again. That is just one example. But you go to a regular religious person and start teaching him the logic of reincarnation, they're just not going to accept it just because you present it in a logical way. But it's interesting. Several times I've taken people back into a past life, and they even have a hard time accepting it if they didn't accept it beforehand. But it really alters their outlook on it when they can actually remember a past life. They almost question their own mind sometimes when they will go back if they were religious at the time. But I've seen people pretty much change their stance instantly when they can actually remember. So that's an interesting experience. Okay, we're at the end of our class here. Any closing comments or questions before we sign off?
Yeah, this all reminded me of the kid asking his geometry teacher, why is everybody always asking me to find X? Did it never occur to anybody that maybe X don't want to be found?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Anything else?
Thanks for the meditation, JJ. That was really good.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, that's going to be interesting to contemplate. So yeah, don't forget to call upon your messengers this week. It would be kind of interesting. And we'll see what kind of experience people have. Okay, anything else?
Yeah, not only are we calling on all angels, but we are angels. We are messengers.
Right. It's interesting in the Bible itself. Sometimes the word or angel refers to a living person upon the earth, because the word angel merely means messenger. So there's messengers that's alive in physical bodies, and there's messengers that's in the spiritual world. So
That's us.
okay, my friends, it's been great being with you again, and we'll look forward to seeing you all next week.
JJ.
Oh,
JJ.
good to see you.
Hi.
We've got our new guy here. What's
Hey, everybody.
you're the one that just joined, right?
Yes, I am.
Okay,
I'm
what's
sorry.
your name again?
On Facebook, it's Nolo Conosco, but
Okay,
in real life,
that's
my
right.
government name is
Yeah,
Francisco.
yeah. Where are you from?
I'm from Miami, but
Miami.
everybody calls me Frank, so I'll change that here in my Zoom. I just had a quick question. Unfortunately, I had received the call when you were explaining the second reason for disagreements, and so if you could reiterate it or just tell me if you already covered this.
Well, we've got this recorded, so I'll be posting the recording, and you can catch up on anything that you missed.
I will do that. But I wanted to ask, because what I did gather, taking into consideration that I missed the second one, was wouldn't a lot of this, isn't it essentially covered by a lack of understanding as the main reason why these disagreements happen? And if that is the case, how can one develop a better understanding towards others?
Well, that's part of it, but more than anything else is just stubbornness on the part of people, because when I've had arguments with people that I have a hard time reaching agreement with, I say, well, I say to them, now we don't disagree that much. The problem is you're not understanding what I'm saying. And I try to get them to understand what I'm saying, and oftentimes they will just refuse to understand. I mean, it would be easy if they were cooperative, but oftentimes the person wants to be right more than reach agreement or understand. And so this wanting to be right, insisting you be right is a problem, is a real big problem in communication. But if you think, well, I don't care who's right, I just would like to be able to reach agreement that we can both see through the same eyes. And if two people have that attitude, then harmony is much easier to reach. But so oftentimes the lack of understanding is just stubbornness on the part of one or both of the people.
Okay, but just because somebody else is not understanding me, that doesn't mean that I don't have to understand that they lack or that I should understand that they lack understanding. And then taking that into consideration, how can one find balance through that or harmony within the conversation? Like, because I've been through those same scenarios where I've brought out the dictionary to explain a word, right?
Yeah,
And
right.
they're stuck in their ways, you know, and no matter how many times you show them, even words that have just one definition, it doesn't seem to get the point across. And you did point out that it's about who's right and who's wrong, that's what causes, nobody wants to be wrong, right?
Yeah,
And so,
what I've found is when you have a disagreement with another person and in the midst of an argument, what you have to do is pretty much sense how far you can go. And this is what I do with them. I sense their degree of understanding and their degree of how far they're willing to go. And then if you're paying attention, you can kind of understand how far you can go, and that if you try to go farther, you're just going to irritate them. So what I do is once I go as far as my soul tells me I can go, then I just switch the subject to something else.
detach from your ego, right?
Yeah,
Like
you just have to sometimes let it go, because you can't, you can only go so far. But if you take them to their limit, it's quite possible you planted some seed thoughts in their mind. And I've done this before, that I've had arguments with people and then meet them a couple months later and they're telling me what I told them earlier, as if it's something that's they believed all along. And so that's kind of satisfying when that happens, because they don't give you credit, but they've actually thought about what you've said, and it planted as a seed thought, and they've determined on their own. It's like my first wife. She was really stubborn, and I couldn't teach her anything. So what I do is I would find a book on the subject I wanted her to learn, and I would leave it laying around where she could find it. And if she picked up the book and read it on her own, then she would start teaching me out of the book. And I thought, that's great, it worked. Because people like to feel like they've achieved enlightenment on their own. They don't want to give anybody else credit. That shouldn't be our attitude, but it's the attitude of the personality, that they want to feel like they've achieved on their own without people helping them. And so the best thing is to just plant seeds in people, or leave a book around for them to read.
a good strategy. Thank you for elaborating. I appreciate it. Thank you, everybody, for your time.
Yeah, great to have you on board.
And then there's Bill Clinton. They want to know what's the meaning of is.
Yeah, what is that was a tremendous statement.
We were all clear on it. He was the one who wasn't clear on it.
Yeah, that was almost funny. I thought Bill Clinton was dead to the water when he said he's smoked pot but didn't inhale. I thought that was going to destroy him, but it didn't even seem to hurt him. But okay, anyway, good to have you with us, and we will see you all next week at 10 a.m. next Sunday, all being well.
Everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.
Good night.